So what's happening in Queensland is only a few decades ago you had Joe Bianchi-Peterson ran a virtual police state. You couldn't protest. Now these protesters go through the CBD disrupting traffic and the police stand by and watch them, don't arrest them. I don't think that's going to dissuade them from future protests. I don't think that's probably the wisest tactic. Let's go to Townsville now and catch up with One Nation leader Pauline Hanson. Just on that, Pauline Hanson, honestly, surely police have got to arrest these people if they're doing this regularly in the Brisbane CBD.
And so they should, but the police tend to step back from it. They're being told by their masters, the political side of the wing, to actually not intervene and not do anything about it. People are fed up with these protesters who think they've got control, they can do whatever they want to do. The same as the vegans going onto these farms, and for a judge to give it a $1 fine, it's not good enough and it should be actually stopped. Give them a heavy fine. Say that you can't do it. I've got no problems with saying a protest, but you don't disrupt people's businesses or their lives. And we just continually put up with it more and more all the time, and we don't say and speak out against it.
Well, you only encourage them, right? They create chaos, therefore they get media coverage, and if the police won't arrest them because they're only going to get a slap on the wrist in the courts anyway, they're just going to keep doing it. So surely they need stronger policing and heavier penalties.
I spoke a few years ago to the president of the Police Association Victoria. He said at the Moomba Festival, you know, when they were all rioting on the streets, they were told by the government, don't go in, don't do anything about it, take the CTV footage of it and they'll look at it later on. They were told not to do it. It's not the police. The police are being told by their superiors what to do.
Now, Pauline Hanson, let's move on to some federal issues and the idea of Indigenous recognition. The surprise announcement from Ken Wyatt that he wants to build consensus and get a referendum to the Australian people within 3 years. Why don't you surprise us now, embrace the spirit of this and tell us that you think from a One Nation point of view there is potential for national consensus on this?
Because I don't believe it's going to unite us as a nation. I think it will divide us. We are all Australians together, regardless of your cultural background, regardless of your race, regardless of you're Aboriginal or Indigenous to this land, whether you're born here like I am or whether you've come as a migrant to make this your homeland. We should not be treated any differently to everyone else. Now, by acknowledging that they are the traditional owners of the land or putting into the Constitution that we acknowledge them or giving them a voice, Aboriginals already have a voice. Remember Senator Bonner represented Queensland for many years, an Aboriginal. He was on the floor of Parliament. He did like every other Australian. He applied to become a member of Parliament as a candidate and was elected by the people. We are only looking at tokenism if we actually say we're going to put them in the Constitution. And actually under Constitution, section 51(26) of the Constitution, under a referendum of 19 specific laws for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders of any state and the Commonwealth. So therefore, we are treating them totally different based on race. It is not going to stop these sexually transmitted diseases. It won't stop the domestic violence abuse, the alcoholism that's happening, the, health issues. I've just been up to the north. I've spoken to the Aboriginal communities and the Torres Strait Islands up there. There are other ways to deal with this, to give them the voice and work together as one.
Let's just talk about it, though, from a practical point of view. Of course, the federal government does have the constitutional power to look after Indigenous affairs, as you say, and that is important because there are issues such as native title that arm of government needs to administer, as well as addressing all the other areas of disadvantage that you just mentioned. Obviously, Indigenous people have to have some sort of advisory input into that. Why not just recognise that, upgrade it, call it the voice, and accept it as a practical improvement?
Like we did with ADSIC years ago, the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander Commission, which I said in my maiden speech that we should actually get rid of.
You know that was a disaster.
Okay, there you go, Chris. They had their voice, and it was costing over $2 billion a year, and they were ripping off the money out of people. And you know damn well, what's their guarantee that's not going to happen again?
Well, the guarantee is that this is a totally different sort of a body. The idea is this is an advisory body to give advice to government, not to dole out money and be corrupted in the way that ADSIC was.
Oh, come on, Chris, there's corruption going on now in our society. You're looking at 30 to 33 billion a year that's poured into the industry. There is corruption now as it is. And if you speak up against it, you're called racist. Why don't we acknowledge that you help people on an individual needs basis, not based on race? I'm sick of the tokenism. I'm sick of being made out that, you know, this is my country. I'm a migrant. I'm not a bloody migrant. I was born here. And I think it's an insult to all Australians. You know, the Australian taxpayer should actually be getting accountability. But if you raise the issue, speak about it. Many years ago, I spoke about many issues. I got criticised as a racist. Noel Pearson comes out and says exactly the same. Oh, you're a good bloke, pat on the back. Well, be upfront and honest what is happening in our society, because that's what the Australian people want. And if you bring this in, it is going to, and especially the preamble, to acknowledge them as the traditional owners of this land, which we know. They were here before white settlement, but the whole fact is, if we ever become a republic, that will sever us, our ties to our crown and sovereignty. It can be challenged in the courts because we, the people, have acknowledged them as the traditional owners of the land. Where does it leave us with ownership of our land?
Well, there's a taste of the argument we're going to have across this land for a long while to come now that it's back on the agenda. I do want to move on to some other issues, though, Pauline Hanson. Firstly, these reports, this warning from you that the government shouldn't take you for granted, that you're building a relationship with Labor. I mean, you're a crossbench party. It only makes sense. Of course, you'd listen to all the major parties, but what areas do you think that you could find some common ground to do anything worthwhile or block anything you oppose with Labor?
Well, I don't really like their economic policies where they're headed, and especially the taxes they wanted to bring into the country, negative gearing and the franking credits. I totally disagree with that. You know, some other things of going after the multinationals to pay their taxes in the country I've been on about for the last 20-odd years, totally agree with it. Yes, we do need reform in industrial relations, but I want to ensure that I'm not against unions. They have a purpose to ensure they're not being ripped off and a fair day's pay for a fair day's work. So to ensure that the government doesn't treat corporations totally different to the unions, and you've got to have a fair balance so it all works together. Look, I'm quite happy to talk to everyone. Show me what your argument is. I will listen to it. At the end of the day, I'm there to represent the Australian people. I'm not there to tick and flick the government's legislation or the policies. And they've taken me for granted, my support. And a lot of people out there think that possibly because I was former a Liberal that I owe my allegiance to them. I don't, and I don't owe my allegiance to the Labor Party or, for that matter, to the Greens at all. But I will look at decent legislation that's put forward by any political party, what I think is the best interest for the country and the people.
Do you get on well with Albo, and do you think you can deal with him more closely than you did with Bill Shorten?
Oh, most definitely. It's already happening. I mean, so I had 2 meetings with Bill Shorten, and I didn't like his demeanour. I didn't like the way that he came across. I just had this barrier. I said, I don't trust you, and I've always said that up front. But Albanese, I actually went on a parliamentary delegation with him to India. I got to spend time with him. He's a good bloke. Do I think he's got it right? He's too far to the left for me when it comes to refugees or opening up the borders and allowing people in the country and these things. No, I don't agree with that. I don't agree with Labor's policies there. We've got to have a balance of the number of people we bring into the country. But can I talk to him? Yes, I can. And he said to me, he phoned me up and he said, Pauline, my door is always open to you. And I appreciate that. I haven't had that from Morrison. He only just said, come up to me in the chamber the other day and said, oh, hello, Pauline. So I've had more out of Albanese, you know, to actually speak to me than what Morrison has.
Well, there's a note. There's a very public note to the Prime Minister, and no doubt he'll hear that, Pauline Hanson. You just mentioned unions and how you're not anti-union. And there's one area of union activity that I certainly always support, and I'm certain you would, and that is their constant push in dangerous industries for worker safety. And we've seen the tragic toll in Queensland mines over the past 12 months. 6 people killed in the last 12 months, 4 people killed this year. And with this ridiculous shambles of the Safety Committee not meeting because they didn't meet their gender quota, what needs to happen in Queensland in particular, but nationally, to make sure that workers don't lose their lives in these industries we know are dangerous, and there should be very strict processes in place to make them safe?
They're a lot safer now because the negotiations that the unions have done over the years for safety for all workers, not only in the coal mining industry but all industries and building sites as well. The fact is that we've got to get rid of this gender equality rubbish that they're pushing out there, because there are people who are not competent enough and shouldn't be in those positions, and you're denying someone else who will have a great input onto those boards. Get rid of the gender equality rubbish. That's a start. I think that unions have a place in presenting the arguments, but I've also heard from the building industry that unions just walk in, shut everything down. So if you've got someone who wants to lay the concrete out of pure bitterness or wanting to show their power and their control, they'll shut it down and stop the laying of that concrete. And so they actually send, the pour goes off, and it's a great cost to the builder on that site. So both sides need to wake up to themselves. If you've got an argument, fair enough, but I can see both sides, and I've spoken to unions, and they admit it, they're not bloody angels, and you have to find a balance there that you get it right for the workers and the government can go ahead. But unions, you do not run this country. The people have put in place a government that actually does govern this country. Don't stand over people. Present your argument, and if you have a case, you will have my full support.
Just a couple of other issues I want to get your thoughts on, Pauline Hanson. One is this issue of the Murray-Darling Basin Agreement. There's been a lot of focus on this from the ABC and elsewhere, looking to demonise certain companies or individuals. But at heart, there is a problem here, isn't there, in making sure that government money is well spent, that water is preserved in the right places. Do you have concerns about this, and do you have any sympathy when it comes to this push for a Royal Commission into the water agreements?
Chris, I actually did get involved in the Murray-Darling, and a couple of years ago, just after I was elected, I did a 3-day tour by bus with my other senators and staffers and advisors from Melbourne in through Victoria, New South Wales, across the border and to the mouth. I had extensive talks with communities, farmers. The farming sector has been devastated because they don't have the water to supply what they need to grow the crops. So we're shutting down an industry. Communities are dying because businesses are having to leave. So if you've got farmers in the area that are going, they're not buying the equipment, so therefore they're moving on. So it's having an impact. The big problem with all this happened in 2004 when John Howard separated water from land. So when you buy land, doesn't necessarily mean that you own the water on it. We've seen the increase in ownership. About 20% of water in Australia is in hands of foreign ownership. We also have people who are bought water allocations who have no connection with the land. They are traders. They are there to make a lot of money out of the situation in Australia. The whole Murray-Darling Basin plan should be thrown out and should be re-looked at again. The government has put $13 billion into it, and according to the program, $4.8 billion has been wasted. And when you have a multinational company from Canada, superannuation scheme, that have actually received $40 million because of water allocation, or putting in infrastructure, I have a big problem about that. So I think the Murray-Darling Basin Plan used to work effectively years ago till the government got involved, and they've tinkered with it. I think it's a useless organisation, and they say, and South Australia has got a lot to answer to by putting in the barrages there. The lower lakes were once salt, now they've changed it to fresh water. That doesn't need to be the case. So take out the barrages, let the natural water flow happen there, and you'd save a lot of the problems, but you don't waste water coming in because they want to clear out the mouth of the river that's been affected because they put in the barrages in the first place. I've got a lot to say on this, Chris. I've done a lot of research into it.
Do you think there needs to be a federal Royal Commission? There's been a South Australian one. The South Australia was only connected there with South Australia. It does need to, because when I was on the Senate Inquiry Estimates Committee, I actually was asking about, once there used to be wetlands in South Australia, they actually got rid of it, made it into a agricultural land. That has a big impact. Do you know they tried to shut me down from asking that question? The true science of the whole lot has always been shut down. There's a lot to answer here, and they haven't got it right yet. We actually have taken water out for the environment, but a lot of that water's been bought up by people who shouldn't have an investment in it, should never have been sold. And I'd get rid of Howard's law that he brought in 2004, supported by Labor, to separate water from land. It was all about to give these people an asset, a commodity. They can make a lot of money out of it, out of the expense of the farming sector and communities, and that is so wrong. Just finally, Pauline Hanson, do we blame you and One Nation, or Anastasia Palaszczuk and the Labor government, or climate change for the demise of Queensland Rugby League?
That's it. OK, I'm going to laugh at that one. I'm going to laugh at that one.
It's important.
Maybe I should get involved and I'll go and give the guys a pep talk.
Give them a pep talk. It's important to be gracious in victory. It was a great series. Bad luck to the Maroons, and you go give them a pep talk.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Good to talk with you, Chris.
Pauline
Bye.
Hanson there.